In April 1940, the peaceful and neutral country of Norway became a battleground between Germany, France, and England in their desire to control it for their own war objectives. The Battle of Norway, and as the Germans called it, Operation Weserübung, was the first major military operation in history to utilize naval, ground, air, and airborne forces in the assault phase of the attack. The German success in this operation provides an outstanding example of the application of operational art and the principles of war by Germany in the early stages of World War II. The principles of surprise and security were the most critical in this German military success. Operation Weserübung included both the invasion of Denmark and the invasion of Norway. The first phase of the operation was the invasion of Denmark. Its air bases were needed for the invasion of Norway, and it fell in a single day. Military background. During the spring of 1939, the British Admiralty began to consider the possibility of using Scandinavia as a potential theater of war with Germany. A continental land battle had been ruled out by the British government due to the conceivable repetition of the First World War. Therefore, a blockade strategy was considered in order to weaken Germany economically, using the vastly superior resources of the Royal Navy to deny Germany iron ore from the Swedish mining district upon which it was heavily dependent. Much of this ore was shipped through the northern Norwegian port of Narvik during the winter months. Therefore, control of the Norwegian coast was considered vital in the enforcement of a blockade against Germany. In October 1939, the chief of the German Kriegsmarine, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, became concerned that the British occupation of Norway posed an unacceptable risk to Nazi Germany. He discussed his concerns with Adolf Hitler, the danger posed by eventual British bases in Norway, and the possibility of Germany seizing these bases before the United Kingdom could. The Navy argued that possession of Norway would allow control of the nearby seas and serve as a staging base for future submarine operations against the UK. But at this time, the other branches of the Wehrmacht were not interested, and Hitler had just issued a directive stating that the main effort would be a land offensive through the Low Countries. Operation Plan. Convinced of the threat posed by the Allies to the iron ore supply, Hitler ordered Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, Armed Forces High Command, OKW, to begin preliminary planning for an invasion of Norway on the 14th of December 1939. The preliminary plan was named Studi Nord and only called for one army division. Between 14 and the 19th of January, the Kriegsmarine developed an expanded version of this plan. They decided upon two key factors. That surprise was essential to reduce the threat of Norwegian resistance and British intervention. The second, to use faster German warships, rather than comparatively slow merchant ships, as troop transports. This would allow all targets to be occupied simultaneously, as transport ships only had limited range. This new plan called for a full Army Corps, including a mountain division, an airborne division, a motorized rifle brigade, and 2 infantry divisions. The target objectives of this force were the following: the Norwegian capital Oslo and nearby population centers, Bergen, Narvik, Tromsø, Trondheim, Kristiansand, Stavanger. The plan also called for the rapid capture of the kings of Denmark and Norway in the hopes that would trigger a rapid surrender. On the 21st of February 1940, command of the operation was given to General Nikolaus von Falkenhorst. He had fought in Finland during the First World War and was familiar with Arctic warfare. But he was only to have command of the ground forces, despite Hitler's desire to have a unified command. The final plan was codenamed Operation Weserübung, Exercise on the Weser, on the 27th of January 1940. The ground forces would be the 21 Army, including the 3rd Mountain Division and 5 infantry divisions, none of the latter having yet been tested in battle. The initial echelon would consist of 3 divisions for the assault, with the remainder to follow in the next wave. 3 companies of paratroopers would be used to seize airfields. The decision to also send the 2nd Mountain Division was made later. Almost all U-boat operations in the Atlantic were to be stopped in order for the submarines to aid in the operation. Every available submarine, including some training boats, were used as part of Operation Hartmut in support of Weserübung. Initially, the plan was to invade Norway and to gain control of Danish airfields by diplomatic means. But Hitler issued a new directive on the 1st of March that called for the invasion of both Norway and Denmark. This came at the insistence of the Luftwaffe to capture fighter bases and sites for air warning stations. The 31st Corps was formed for the invasion of Denmark, consisting of 2 infantry divisions and the 11th Motorized Brigade. The entire operation would be supported by the 10th Air Corps, consisting of some 1,000 aircraft of various types. In February 1940, the British destroyer HMS Cossack boarded the German transport ship Altmark while in Norwegian waters, thereby violating Norwegian neutrality, rescuing POWs held also in violation of Norwegian neutrality. The Altmark was obliged to release them as soon as she entered neutral territory. Hitler regarded this as a clear sign that the UK was willing to violate Norwegian neutrality, and so became even more strongly committed to the invasion. German invasion. On the early morning of the 9th of April 1940, Germany occupied Denmark and invaded Norway, ostensibly as a preventive measure against the French-British occupation of Norway. Germany informed both countries in a memorandum that it had come to protect Scandinavian neutrality against Allied aggression. Under the command of General of the Infantry Nikolaus von Falkenhorst, German forces took on armed defense and laid extensive mine barriers to protect operations. Marine forces were under General Admiral Solwachter and Admiral Karls, while the Luftwaffe was under the command of General Geisler and the motorized troops and tanks under General Kaupisch. While Denmark quickly capitulated, there was heavy resistance in Norway. Germany's memo explained that England was violating international law in the sovereign territories of Denmark and Norway. England's goals appeared to be to cut Germany off from its supply of iron ore by occupying Narvik, and to set up a new front in Scandinavia in order to attack Germany from the north. Germany wanted to prevent Scandinavia from being abused as a battlefield, it claimed, and urged Norway to cooperate, offering to provide sufficient military strength to protect strategically important positions. Emphasizing that the territorial integrity and political independence of Norway would not be infringed, Germany asked the Norwegian people to ensure that the smooth advance of the German troops was enabled. In Norway, the towns of Narvik, Trondheim, Bergen, Stavanger, Oslo, Arendal, Egersund and Kristiansand were now all in German hands. The Navy had secured operations, transport and landings from Oslo to Narvik and broken initial resistance, while the Luftwaffe had attacked English naval forces and transport ships and destroyed almost all of them. Germany had expected the Norwegian government to surrender. Instead, it decamped inland. Vidkun Quisling, head of the fascist National Samling, wanted a coup, although this was not Germany's preferred option. However, he was told that if he succeeded, he would have Hitler's support. Quisling proclaimed a new government with himself as prime minister on the evening of April 9th and recognized by Hitler. King Haakon, however, rejected the German demand to appoint Quisling as head of this government, meaning that Quisling had no popular support. As a consequence, Hitler set up his own governing commission, offering Quisling a position in this regime. Together with German administrator Joseph Terboven, Quisling served as prime minister until the end of the war. Allied respond. By April 11th, all was quiet in Oslo and the Norwegian authorities there were cooperating with the Germans. The army declared willingness to participate in air defense and Norwegian flak fired against Allied planes. At Narvik, English forces tried to penetrate the port, leading to 4 English destroyers attacked or sunk. The English government, however, seemed reluctant to admit the failures at sea. In what was known as the Second Battle of Norway, the First Battle of Norway having taken place on April 9th, the English carried out air raids against Norway, Stavanger and Bergen on April 13th. Despite English naval troops blocking the entrance to the port, there was peace in Norway by mid-April, and no attempts were made by the English to land there, although they made small landings at Namsos and Harstad. By April 17th, German troops had occupied the iron ore railway line near Narvik, taken Kongsvinger and were advancing. Heavy combat ensued at sea with German waterplanes, as well as between English naval forces and the Luftwaffe. However, English forces managed to also land at Andalsnes on April 18th, and at Namsos, which the Germans bombed heavily. The taking of Narvik by the Germans had not been easy. It lies 1,200 kilometers from the Norwegian front in a region north of the Arctic Circle. Conditions had been further complicated by the polar night and heavy resistance by the Norwegians. But the coastal territory between Trondheim and Oslo was now secured and Narvik occupied by German troops. By April 21st, German and Norwegian troops were defending the fortress of Trondheim against English troops, and on April 22nd, English ships were bombed and the landed troops robbed of all operational resources. While the English continued to heavily shell the city of Narvik and the port, Germans advanced via Lillehammer. They took the strategically important town of Steinkjer at the outermost northeast coast of Trondheim Fjord, where combat now ceased. Everywhere north of Oslo, the Germans had now broken resistance. In essence, the English naval forces were fighting against the Luftwaffe, as the German fleet had been heavily hit. It seemed that London, however, did not have proper communication with the troops in Norway and thus no comprehensive overview of the situation. Ultimately, the Luftwaffe was successfully preventing landings from taking place, while destroying fortifications, railways junctions and supply stores. German land forces cleared the territory around Bergen of Norwegian troops, while the ports occupied by the Allies were bombed and planes destroyed on an airfield near their bases at Andalsnes. Retreating and ceasefire. The battle in the north reached its third phase on April 26th, with the Germans systematically reaching every goal. While the English and Norwegian troops had almost no food or ammunition left, German troops still commanded good supplies. In fact, on April 27th, the English had begun retreating. The destructive impression that the news of England's retreat would have in England. And the world was not underestimated by the English government, who explained that England's difficulty was gathering heavy materials such as artillery, tanks and flak at the coastal points, which were controlled by the Luftwaffe, and this control was the main advantage secured by Germany. In fact, three factors had been decisive for the Germans: their air superiority, successful strategic tactics in the Trondheim sector, and the speed with which they advanced. By May 2nd, German troops reached Andalsnes, where they hoisted the German Reich war flag. The English cleared this area, leaving large amounts of supplies, and on May 4th, the German press reported that the English were fleeing in panic, leaving their material, vehicles and wounded behind. The failure of the English troops led to an extraordinary loss of prestige for the Allies. In general, there was outrage in Norway, and the Norwegian soldiers felt abandoned by the English comrades with whom they had fought. Although combat still continued at outposts in Narvik, the Norwegians called for a ceasefire in Namsos and Andalsnes. The commander of the Norwegian troops in Trondheim reported bitterly that the Allies left Namsos without warning. In the far north, the Allies continued to fight Germany over the control of the port of Narvik, from which they succeeded in driving out the Germans on May 28. However, due to the deteriorating situation in Europe, they then withdrew completely and Germany recaptured Narvik on June 9th. The Norwegian army capitulated finally on June 10th. Great cost. The operation as planned was a decisive success for Germany. Both Denmark and Norway were occupied. Surprise was almost complete, particularly in Denmark. At sea, the invasion proved a significant setback. For the Kriegsmarine, the campaign led to crippling losses, leaving the Kriegsmarine with a surface force of 1 heavy cruiser, 2 light cruisers and 4 destroyers operational. This left the Navy weakened during the summer months when Hitler was pursuing plans for an invasion of Britain. The greatest cost of the campaign on land came in the need to keep most of the invasion troops in Norway for occupation duties away from the fronts. On the whole, the campaign was a costly enterprise with limited benefit for the victor. The Norwegian government established the Nordtraship system on the 22nd of April to gain the services of the Norwegian Merchant Navy. The 1,028 ship fleet consisted of 85% of the pre-war Norwegian merchant fleet and was crewed by 27,000 sailors. 43 free Norwegian ships were sunk during the Norwegian campaign and 29 were interned by the neutral Swedes. Nordtraship gave the Norwegian government in exile economic independence and a basis for resistance from abroad. The Allies achieved a partial success at Narvik. The Germans had destroyed much of the port facilities there before their loss of the city on the 28th of May. Shipping from the port was stopped for a period of 6 months, although the Allies had believed it would be out of operation for a year. The German occupation of Norway was a thorn in the side of the Allies during the next few years. Bombers based at Sola had a round trip of 920 kilometers to Rattray Head in northeast Scotland, while the east of Scotland and coastal shipping suffered from bombing raids until 1943. German commerce raiders used Norway as a staging base to reach the North Atlantic, and after Germany invaded the Soviet Union, air bases in Norway were used to interdict Allied Arctic convoys there, inflicting painful losses to shipping.